Marsilio Ficino, this famous figure who is so instrumental in the Renaissance, who I feel a deep personal kinship to, and who was just, I think we can all feel fondly about. He really helped to rebirth the magical tradition, to give a central place to astrology, and to really open some very he was a forerunner of certain aspects of modern thinking and modern astrology, as we'll see. So it's 1462. Ficino is 29 years old. Of course, we know that means he's in his Saturn return. He must have done some good work running up to this point because he has a very positive Saturn return. His patron, Cosimo Medici, installs him in this estate in the Florence Hills and says, go to town, translate these old Greek works, write commentaries on them, you've got full salary to just be a thinker and be a learner and make me look good. Later, Ficino will become the head of the new Platonic Academy that's founded in Florence by the Medicis. Cosimo Medici is this political figure. He comes from a wealthy banking family. His stated purpose is that he wants to create a political and civil society in which humanity is in balance with the heavens, but he is a ruthless politician. There's a lot of, what's happened at this point is Italy has broken down into these smaller city-states that are run effectively by tyrants with these mercenary armies fighting with one another. But these guys have a lot of power, a lot of control, a lot of money, and part of the way that they fill their court, make themselves look good, show off their wealth, is by hiring scholars like Ficino, hiring artists like Michelangelo to build these amazing tombs for you with these crazy sculptures on top of them. The Medicis just had so much influence. They pretty much controlled Florence, and Florence was really the heart of the Renaissance in a lot of ways. Geographically, it was really well positioned in between, connected both to Northern Europe, but also to the peninsula in Italy, the sea trade routes. So it was at the center of Europe, connecting a lot of the various threads. The Medicis, he wrote himself into this lineage that runs all the way back into Roman times. So if you recall, Octavian Augustus, who took power after Caesar was assassinated, he ended up fighting with Mark Antony and Cleopatra and defeating them and taking back Egypt. Cleopatra was the last of the Ptolemies, who had been that dynasty that had gone all the way back to a general of Alexander's. So literally on the anniversary of the defeat of Mark Antony and Cleopatra at Actium, that same day, the Medicis defeat their rivals in this big battle that goes on around Florence, and they just rise to dominance. This is really when they take control. Cosimo is interested in the astrology of that day. On that day, the sun is conjunct his natal Mars, and his natal Mars is in Leo, conjunct Regulus, the royal star. So just to give you a taste that these political figures are interested in astrology. They're thinking about it, they're using it. Cosimo identifies himself with Octavian Augustus, with the winner of the battle against Mark Antony and Cleopatra. And Cosimo will eventually use astrology as a political propaganda tool, just like they did in Rome. He even casts a victory medal with his ascendant sign on it, Capricorn. And if you remember, Octavian had printed this coin that had Capricorn on it, which was his moon sign. So Cosimo was very aware of writing himself into this lineage and using astrology and power, just like the Romans did. So multiple Medicis will go on to become popes, and like I said, will continue to use astrology even after they're the popes to maintain dominance. So back to Ficino. So I mean, just really to underline this mixed legacy, it feels dark talking in such blunt terms about the way astrology was being instrumentalized politically, but at the same time, if not for the Medicis, Ficino wouldn't have translated any of these works. None of this amazing art would have been created. So again, the mixed legacy of power. So Ficino translates the Orphic in the Homeric hymns. He translates the sayings of Zoroaster, of Zoroastrianism. He translates the Corpus Hermeticum, all these old Hermetic magical texts. He does the entire works of Plato, translates all of this from Greek into Latin. He translates Porphyry, Iamblichus, Proclus, the Neoplatonists, Plotinus as well, all from the Greek into Latin for the very first time. The Corpus Hermeticum, these magic texts, it just sends shockwaves through Catholic Europe. This is not the kind of thing that devout priests like to be seeing coming into the mainstream of thinking and of court culture. But it really does reignite this magical tradition that had laid dormant since Roman times. And it doesn't just wake it back up, Ficino will bring it to new heights. Of course, Ficino is a Christian, and he doesn't just play lip service to Christianity, he sees himself truly as a Christian. And so his angle is that all of these predecessors, they're all pre-Christians in a way. Had Christ been around, they would have been Christian, but it's not their fault that they came a little bit too early. We can still appreciate their work. And so what this kicks off is what you hear talked about as the search for the Prisca Theologia, the original, pure, monotheistic religion that reaches back to Zoroaster, to Hermes, to Orpheus, to Pythagoras, to Plato. This idea that there's always been monotheism and that Christianity is the ultimate expression of it, but that these earlier figures were climbing up the same mountain. And this is the origin of what today we would call the perennialist tradition. Sometimes you hear say, oh, there's one summit to the mountain, but there's many roots up the mountain. So, Christianity, Buddhism, all the different religions, they're all kind of going towards the same thing. This is the first time that an idea like that was articulated. And so Ficino, he's bringing together all these wildly different influences and making them cohere in this new, fertile, syncretic combination. Ficino is just a massively influential mind. He coins the term Platonic love. It comes from him. He influences Botticelli, Michelangelo, Raphael, Titian. When they all start taking on these pagan subjects in their art, it's so much because of his translations and commentaries and bringing these into the center of the conversation. He Christianizes paganism, and this opens the door to celebrating it. Like in Botticelli's paintings, we saw the Primavera, Birth of Venus, of course. These are pagan deities. But eventually, all throughout the Vatican, we're going to have pagan gods on the walls and the ceilings. It's just amazing that this even happened. Ficino says that it's not enough to study the world. One must change it. This is rooted in what we were saying about philosophy and religion are not separate. You don't sit back at a distance and study the world. No, you get down there in the ring, and the things that you think and turn over, they change your life and they change the world around you. He says that the function of astrology is not to manage the present, but to heal it. In 1489, he writes the Liber de Vita, the Book of Life. It's an astrology book, but it is not one on interrogations or elections. Rather, it's all about harmonizing oneself physically and spiritually with heaven in order to facilitate longevity, to be in touch at one with the cosmos. There's this major emphasis on sympathetic magic, ritual, meditation, talismans, music, herbs. It's all about the great chain of being, correspondence theory. So what Ficino is doing is he's really legitimizing magic in a Christian context. He's just totally immersed in the spirit of Hermeticism. We have these accounts that every day he would be singing Orphic hymns on his lyre and performing pagan rituals. He decorated his villa with pictures of the pagan deities and their astrological motifs on the wall that he thought should be contemplated daily for the elevation of the soul. He had a bust of Plato, this statue of Plato that had a candle in front of it that was never allowed to go out. To give you a feeling for the kind of, there's something decadent going on, not in the bad sense, but just so rich, such a celebration. Ficino has balancing practices for the soul and body involving the planets. He would draw down the powers of heaven to earth and then embody them in statues or icons. It's all deeply participatory and animated, this drive to live in harmony with a living spiritual cosmos. And not to control it through magic, but in a way to become enchanted oneself. Ficino says that there are two sorts of unfortunate people. There are those who live contrary to their nature, and there are those who submit to it. He says that both of these people will be the subject of fate. Instead, what we can do, the mind, including its moral choices, could be in direct relationship with the stars. We can enhance or minimize the effects of a transit by our participation, our conversation with the starry deities. So he really elevates the planetary deities by understanding them as aspects of the inner psyche with whom one can communicate. These are not just external, these are not just causal, they're not even just signs. Ficino says if we want to take this micro-macro idea seriously, as above so below, as in the cosmos so in the anthropos, if we take this seriously, then the planets are not just outside of us, but they're inside of us because we're the microcosm. So this is totally against Aquinas' body-soul distinction that we mentioned earlier. Stars don't affect the body. Not only do they affect the soul, but they live inside of us. These planetary deities, these archetypes are living forces of our psyche. This is revolutionary. I mean, I think you can see where this is going and why people would connect Ficino to depth psychology in the 20th century. Ficino effectively creates the inner psyche from the anima mundi. This is what Jung would call introjection, this taking of the holy deities and bringing them inside of us. So he's a precursor, especially of these Jungian variants of depth psychology with Platonic archetypes, celestial deities as internal functions. And of course, archetypal astrology is very much in this lineage. All of these are heirs to Platonic philosophy in the vein of Iamblichus and Hermeticism. This all goes all the way back to the Egyptian temple tradition and Babylonian astrology. I mean, especially the emphasis on light. We think about Egyptian solar religion, and then the Hermeticist emphasis on light, the Neoplatonists and Plato talking about God and the One, and the analogy of the sun. There's actually a revival of the cult of sun worship going on here with Ficino. He actually connects the literal sun to the spiritual sun. He writes, "The astrological property of every one of us as individuals is solar." He says that our spirit draws in the spirit of the universe through the actual rays of the sun. So maybe you can sense how this theo-heliocentrism is going to start to set up the Copernican revolution. There's this emphasis and appreciation of the actual sun as connected to the inner spiritual sun. So the last bit I want to mention about Ficino is his what we could call his humanist theodicy. If you remember, this word theodicy typically is connected to the question of evil. Remember, Barbara asked, what did Plato do with the question of evil? And Ficino is very much coming out of the Platonists. So I want to read this little passage from Ficino. And so listen to how he treats the malefics that he inherited, the malefic planets, and how what implicitly is going on here with the question of evil. And after I read his quote, I'll read just a little bit that Nick Campion is writing about the quote. Ficino says, "If someone were to accuse Saturn and Mars of being harmful by nature, I would not believe it, for they, too, are to be used sometimes, the way doctors must sometimes use poisons. As Ptolemy, in his Syntiloquium, says, We remember it wasn't Ptolemy who wrote the Syntiloquium, that actually came from the Arabs. When the power of Saturn is cautiously taken, it is useful, just as the things doctors use are useful for binding up and holding together. After all, they even use things to stupefy, like opium. The same goes for Mars, with euphorbia and hellebore. These were poisonous herbs. The Pythagorean maguses seem to have been extremely cautious in this matter, when they would become frightened that their constant philosophizing was the tyranny of Saturn. So they would dress up in white garments and each day sing songs and make music with jovial and Apollonian things. And in this way, they lived a long time under Saturn. So Nick Campion goes on to say, "This simple passage is of the most profound significance, for it contains a solution to the problem of evil, which asserts human responsibility for the creation of good in a manner which no longer requires the two great supernatural powers, God and Satan." Ficino's bold statement of the humanist position, buried deep in his astrological writings, deserves a focal place in Western secular culture. So Ficino's saying that it's not Saturn and Mars that bring evil, it's when they're misused or when they're not handled properly. And actually, the responsibility lies with us. And if we take up that responsibility, we can use even the malefics for the cause of good. But when we choose not to, well, then maybe bad things happen, but that is not on Saturn and Mars. That is not their fault. It is on us to find that balance. And so the humanist position, it places the responsibility with us to use it correctly. With great power comes great duty and accountability. Evil is not inherent in the cosmos, nor is it the intention of the divine, but it comes about through our choices. And you can hear Ficino's talking about the pharmacon here, the medicine, that it can be both poison and cure, depending on how it's used. And so I think it's a really deep way to address the question of evil and to address the astrological issue of the malefics of the problem planets. Jessica and I have our sun tea here that she made. This is direct infused from the center of our solar system, a little magical ritual that we did at break to drink in the sun. So cheers to Ficino. And cheers to Copernicus. We were just laughing. I was just saying, geez, this is a pretty good setup for the Copernican revolution. They get back into these Hermetic texts. They start talking about the sun as the spiritual center of the universe, and then they just happen to discover a few years later that the sun is the actual center of the cosmos. You can't make this stuff up.